This episode of the 46 of 46 podcast is sponsored by Crua Outdoors. Camp comfortably with the world's best insulated tents and outdoors gear. Check out their tents, sleeping bags, pads, and more at cruaoutdoors.com. That's CRUA outdoors.com. Crua Outdoors, the best night's sleep you'll have in the wild. This is the 46 of 46 podcast Summit Sessions, where we'll talk all things Adirondack, backcountry, and beyond. From high peak stories and adventures to trail tips and tricks, we'll dive deep into the heart of these mountains and the people who passionately climb them. Adirondack maps and spruce traps, bushwhacks and backpacks. It's all here on the 46 of 46 Summit Sessions. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Summit Session here on the 46 of 46 podcast. Since this podcast typically revolves around stories from the trail, today will be exactly that, but it will be someone else's story this time. Whenever we go out exploring the backcountry in search of adventure, nature, views, or just to get the heart pumping and break a sweat, there's always the very real possibility that our day hike will turn into an unexpected and unplanned overnight. It's important to always be prepared for this scenario because anything can happen out there and the mountains don't care if you're prepared or not. My guest today experienced one of these exact nights out on the trail back in July of 2017 when his group's day hike in the remote Santanoni range resulted in getting lost and ultimately spending a rainy night in the wilderness. He's an avid outdoorsman, father, husband, and self-proclaimed Star Wars geek who thankfully lived to tell the tale. His name is Jay Morrison, and he's here tonight to tell us the story of that fateful night deep in the Santanonis. Jay, welcome to the 46 of 46 podcast, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, James. It's great to be on. I've been a long-time fan.
Oh, I appreciate that very much. And before we get into it, are you ready for this statistic about myself?
Oh, yes.
I have seen one Star Wars movie. One. The Phantom Menace.
I won't hold that against you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So as a Star Wars geek, I assume that probably makes your blood boil a little bit. I get that a lot at work. I work in the film industry, so when people hear that stat, they just look at me like I have 5 heads. But yeah, I've just personally never been a big Star Wars person, but whenever I hear a Star Wars geek, I like to tell them that stat and watch their eyes just roll into the back of their heads.
That's a tough one. Are you a Star Trek person then? Is that what that means?
No, not really.
Interesting.
We just never watched them growing up for, whatever reason. But let's talk about the outdoors now. So before we get into your story about the Santanoni range, take me through, your background. How'd you get into the outdoors and hiking, and what's your story with that?
Sure. So I'm an IT guy and a big geek, and for a very, very long time, I just played video games and sat behind the desk and kind of did this standard IT guy thing. Until probably, I think it was August of 2015, a couple of buddies and I said, hey, let's go for a walk in the woods. So we decided to take a trail up Gore Mountain. While we had never really been hiking together at that point, it was an eye-opener, we'll say that. We didn't make it to the top, but we did have a good couple hours just hanging out and just enjoying nature, and it kind of sparked an interest in me that later that year, in fact, it was November 7th, a buddy of mine said, hey, I'm going to hike Cascade and Porter Mountains. Would you like to come? And the way I can equate that experience is there are a handful of moments in life where you can kind of pinpoint something has changed. And, for me, it's when I met the woman who was going to become my wife, when my kids were born. These are very important moments. And when I stood at the top of Cascade and kind of took in that summit, that was another moment in my life that was, kind of like a light switch. Oh, holy pants, I really need to be spending a lot more time out here in the Adirondack Park. So that's really how I got into it.
Very cool. That I think we all have probably those kind of light bulb moments that go off in our lives throughout our entire life. So that's awesome that you're able to kind of pinpoint exactly when that happened for you, especially with the outdoors. So you have a YouTube channel as well. So it's really taken over your life in a sense then.
It has definitely become a much larger part of my life than it was originally. I try and do, over the last year and a half, I try and do a weekly video, and sometimes that includes gear reviews or kind of like a talking head video where, I give something that I'm thinking about at the moment. But a lot of it is trip reports, and that involves, getting out and being on trail to kind of record those and put it all together. So it's awesome. It's dual benefits.
Sure. You and I are very similar in that regard. Cool. So let's get right into your story. So you planned a day hike in the Santanoni range a few summers ago. And if you're not familiar and you're listening, the Santanoni range is a very remote range in the high peaks, and it consists of Panther, Cuxacraga, and Santanoni, 3 different peaks. So the sun went down on your day, both literally and figuratively. So let's go from the start. Tell me the whole story of the day and the night, starting with when you guys arrived at the trailhead. The floor is yours. Take us through this very interesting story.
Sure thing. Actually, I want to back up just a little bit and kind of set the stage for this.
Sure,
this
please
actual
do.
Trip. So in June of 2017, my buddy Mark and I did the Cranberry Lake 50, and we did it over a weekend. It was a 4-day trip, and it's 50 miles around Cranberry Lake, cleverly named. So what we did was, after that trip, my feet were in terrible shape. I had boots, and it was before I found the joys of trail runners. After that trip, I went to my doctor, podiatrist, and they said, you know what? You need to stay off the trails for at least a month. And I was devastated because it's like, I was really feeling good, and we had plans. So I sat around that entire month between June and July, cooking up ideas and plans for our next trip. And the next trip that I could kind of fit into the calendar was the Santanoni range. So for all of these trips, I come up with what I call the plan. It's a capital T, capital P, so it sounds super official, right? And what the plan usually consists of is, where the trailhead is, what mountains we're going to hit, how many miles it's going to be, points of interest, everything you would need to know when you get to the trailhead, how your day is going to look. Mark and I have, at that point, been hiking for a couple years together, and we had at least 25 or 30 different hikes that I could kind of reference as far as our pace. For this particular trip, July 9th of 2017, we were going to the Santanonis. We ended up inviting another friend of ours, Dave, who we had been hiking with a few times previously on smaller trips. And he was already, into his teens for the high peaks at that point. So we figured, hey, yeah, why don't you come along with us? And I would say that was not a mistake, because Dave's a great guy, but it was one of those things that I didn't account for in the plan.
Sure, it was an unknown factor at that point.
Exactly. So fast forward to the morning of the 9th in July, and, I live about 2 hours away from the Tahoe trailhead. So we left the house at, 4:15 a.m., got Mark, got Dave, carpooled up to the trailhead, and we started moving about 7 o'clock in the morning. That's when we kind of were like, okay, signed into the register, and we're walking up the first, I think it's almost 2 miles of that road, that gravel road there.
Yep.
So, the day was awesome. It had rained the past few days. This day was shaping up to be really nice as far as weather was concerned, not too hot, which is always nice in my opinion. There's no rain in the forecast for the day, and we were ready to roll. Now, historically, Mark and my average pace is typically 1 mile an hour. And that includes all of the breaks on trail to take pictures or snacks, and usually a very long rest on the summit just to enjoy, what we accomplished that day. So The Santanoni range is about a 15-mile trek. And so we figured, okay, we're going to be out for 15 or 16 hours. That's a good long day. We don't plan on seeing the parking lot until midnight, essentially. That was the plan. Sometimes plans go awry, but we didn't know that at the time, right? So the hike started out like any other hike in the Adirondacks. The trail is rocky and root-filled. It's got mud everywhere. There's water crossings, throughout the whole thing. It's actually a really nice walk in the woods. It's pretty perfect, considering it's so far away from everything else. There's not many people. It was my type of hike. Now, I prefer doing loops. I don't know about you, but if there's a way I can do a hike and make a loop out of it instead of an out and back, I'm always going to choose that.
Absolutely.
I just like to see, new scenery or different parts. So, in this particular case, when we did the Santanonis, the plan was to go up the Santanoni Express, hit Santanoni Peak, go down to Times Square, head out to Cucamonga, come back, do Panther, and then go down Panther Brook to the Bradley Pond lean-to, and then hike all the way back to the car.
Sounds like a perfect plan. Perfect plan.
Yeah, I think it's pretty common, right? Well, I know in your podcast when you had done the range, you had let people know that these are unmarked trails. And, unmarked trails typically mean there's no DEC markers and not too much trail cleaning, if anything, So if there's a down tree, you're going to go up and around it or underneath it or under it or whatever. The interesting thing about the Santanonis, and I think a lot of the unmarked trails in the Adirondacks now, is that there are so many people aspiring to be 46ers, and they've walked these paths over the last, 5-10 years that, it's an unmarked trail, but it's really, really well defined and
super
very
obvious
easy to follow.
Totally. All of them really in the high peaks. I mean, there's so many unmarked trails. And I remember when I was first doing them being like a little nervous about them. And then, I was told by my buddy Josh, who I hike a lot with, he's like, dude, don't even sweat it. Trust me. They're all as obvious as can be. And they really are.
Yep. Yeah. The only thing missing is the reflective DEC markers.
Totally.
Honestly. So, and we were having a great time that morning. We had the 3 dogs with us, which, if anybody's familiar with my YouTube channel, Daisy was there. Daisy's, kind of a 4-legged star of some of the videos. So a lot of my fans really love having her on video, and she's a great pup. And that's Mark's dog. Dave brought his 2 dogs, Buddy and Lady, and they're awesome. I love having dogs on the trail. It's very, it's a little reassuring because sometimes you never know if there's going to be a bear around, and usually the dogs are very astute to that. But it's just fun to have them. They're they're good company. So the 6 of us are making our way on the trail, and one of the first things you come across once you get into the woods off of the road from the parking area, the gravel road from the parking area, is a hugely dilapidated bridge. And I use the term bridge loosely. At this point, in its lifespan, it was a couple busted logs and some jacked boards over this water source, and that was the Santanoni Brook. So that was kind of like the first interesting piece of the trip. We were like, okay, well, we'll take this one step at a time. You climb down a little bit, go over the water, climb back up, and you're back on the trail, and it's not really a big deal. But yeah, that was fun, kind of wrangling the pups through that little obstacle course.
Yeah, I could imagine, because that bridge is, even using the word bridge, we're using the word bridge very loosely in regards to that one in particular. It's pretty wild when you see it.
Yeah, it's great. And I think, I really like water crossings. I love water in general. And when I'm on hikes, it's kind of really cool. I have a hard time, not just standing there for a few minutes and taking a lot of pictures and just taking it all in. That one was pretty easy to keep moving.
Totally.
So, we're making our way to the first point of interest, which is it